Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's tutorial, we are diving into test-driven development using Node.js, Express, Jest, and Supertest. Test-driven development, also known as TDD, can transform the way you write and think about your code, making it more like reliable and easy to maintain. Mostly, we use the phrase TDD as an acronym where it's more like which stands for test-driven development, where you first write your code before you actually write the test before writing the actual code. Typically, like it involves writing the code, running it to see if it fails, and then writing the main amount of code to pass the test, and then refactoring the code. This approach ensures that the code is always like testable and reliable. So it's more like you first have to write the test for it to fail, and then writing the minimum amount of code that would let the code pass. So before we dive into the various concepts and how we are going to go about it, the basic requirement for this tutorial is you will need to know a little bit about Node.js, Express, how to set up files, how to write a little basic test, something like unit test, integration test, and something like that. And then as well, how to use promises with JavaScript. At least you should have the fundamentals of JavaScript. And then as well, how to basically set up some simple development environment. And it's not beginner friendly, but I'll try to make it as simple as I can. Okay, so let's dive into it and see what we can create. So back in this test that I created, app that I created, which is a backend server, which we are going to test authentication, and then basically more of like authentication test. So in this particular app, I've created a test. I've written test to test for the various routes. It should create user properly, and then we also will have to test should login user properly. Should login user with should not log in user with invalid credentials, and should log out user properly, and that. So if you check in our terminal, we see that we have 12 tests pass, 13 tests pass, and then we have 3 tests used. I actually went on to create something like a post where we will have to create the post using the user details like user ID and that. So if we check our code, which is we check our code, which is these. Let's see. If we check our user controller, we are getting the list of users using the get user controller. I think that will properly explain when I move to route. Let's see, route. Yeah. So when we make a get request, we use the get users controller. When we do a post, we register the user by using the create user controller, and we hit the endpoint of login. We try to log in the user and that. So basically, we are going to write a comprehensive test to test that for all of these various scenarios. So if it's something that you are interested in, let's follow along and then jump into the tutorial. All right, so let me check if I'm still recording. Okay, cool. All right, so back in the VS Code, I've created a folder with the name TDD, YT TDD tested. You can name it whatever name that you want, and then as well, you follow along with what we're about to do. So first of all, let's open our terminal and then install some packages that we will need. So first of all, we need to npm initialize our package.json. We do the -y flag to indicate that we want to skip all the various questions that might be asked. So here we have the package.json, and then let's install the packages or modules that we need. We need npm, we need express, we will need mongoose, we will need .env for our environment variables. We need our JSON web token, and then bcrypt JS. For now, I think that's what we will need off the top of my head. All right, let's wait for it to install. Good. So we also will need to install some dependencies for our development environment, which will be npm-d. We will need Jest. We will need a Supertest. The Supertest will be used to simulate requests to the endpoint. So we need Supertest. We need Jest to be our test runner. And let's install that. Let's wait for it to install. It's taking some few minutes. Let's wait for it. Okay. All right. Okay, so it just occurred to me we also need cookie parser to set our cookies and that. So cookie parser, that will be our part of our dependencies. Okay, so now that is done, let us start with our coding then. So inside our package.json, let's check to see if our dependencies have been installed. We have bcrypt JS here, cookie parser, .env, express, JSON web token to create tokens, and then we have our mongoose for our database. All right, so what we then need to do is that we will need to write a script for the test, where we can say just -- watch. We can leave it at just, but we have to do -- watch all, so that it will always watch the changes in various JavaScript files. So from there, let's create a new folder and say server, and then let's create a new file and say server.js, and then originally we can bring in the express. It will be require express, and then we say const app equals to express, but then we'll need to use this to make request in using our Supertest. So what I would rather would do is that I would rather create a new file and say app.js, and then cut all of this, and paste it in our app here, and then we export the app like this, and then we can then bring in our app here like that. So back in our package.json, let's create a script for the server. We can say server, then I've already installed node-mon globally, so I don't need to install node-mon. And then we say --env -file will be .env file. We don't have that yet, and then we move to server JS like that. We save that, and then let's create our .env file and say .env. What I would want to do is here is I want to create the port that I would want to use, which will be .5000, and save it. So back in the terminal, we can run npm run server like that. It's already started, but then let's check something, write something out and say console.log server started like that. All right, that should give us a server started, which we have that here. Let's continue by setting up our environment, and then we can say let's close it. We don't need our .env file inside our server. We can say app.listen. Let's create our port. It will be process.env.port or port 5000, and we can say app.listen on port, and then we do our console log and say listening on port, and bring in the port. What did we do wrong? Variable. Oh, made a mistake here. Cool. Let's run the server file again. Like that. All right. So everything is working so far. So back in the app file, we can then set up our various middlewares. So go do setup middlewares. We can do app.use express.json file, and then as well, let's bring in the cookie parser to pass our cookies when we set our cookies as well for things like authentication and that. So we do app.use cookie parser like that. All right, everything works so far. Yeah, so basically, so if we should make .get request to if you should hit this endpoint, we can then say return rest.json message, let's say hello world. All right, so let's try to hit this endpoint by, I have this extension that I use, which is the forgotten the name, but I think it is rest something. So when we make a get request to HTTP localhost port 5000, send off the request, we should get something like hello world. All right, but this is not what we intend to do, we tend to rather write our test files, write a test to test these things. So instead of having to type out these things, what we want to do is rather write a test to be able to cater for these manual handling of having to test our endpoint and that. All right. So inside our server file, let's create a new folder and write by writing test, and then we say something like first of all, what we would want to do is that we'd want to create a script, a file that will run first before every other test runs. What do I mean by that? All right, let me write it and then explain. So let's say to create a file called setup test.js, and in here I want to bring in the app file that I created, which will be in that, and then I'll want to also bring in .env file, which will be .env file. Then I'll say .config, and then we don't need the file. You can say config will be an async function, and then what I'd want to do is to set up our setup, and then our teardown function. I would say before all, I'd want to have an async function, and let's just write something like console.log run this file first, and then I would want to write our config file, run our config file here. So basically everything is running well, but then inside the how do we then start off our test? We then will have to stop the terminal here and then run npm run test, npm run test, which should fail because we don't have any test running at the moment. All right, what did we have? All right, so what we can then do is that we can then come in here and then we say since it's an authentication, we can do auth test.js like that, and then we say we have a describe block, and then we describe block and say it should test for authentication, and then we pass in a callback function, and most of the time the test is a bit it's a bit descriptive by saying that it's let's just write a simple function that should just pass. We say, let's say it should just pass like that, and we pass in a callback function, and let's write console.log first test like that. Why is this thing that? Okay. npm test. Why do we? Let's have this come here. This. Oh, let's watch all. Test like that. Do we have this? Oh, should be dash watch all like that. npm test. Yeah, okay. So if we check our terminal, we have our one test which is passing, which is let's close this, which will be this. So our first test, which is this, have that running. So first of all, let us connect to the database first, and then what has happened now is that even though we have set up this file, it is still not running. So for it to run, we need to come in here and then write this configuration in the package.json file for us to say that, well, we would want you to run this file first. You say, is it setup files after env, which takes an array of and say root there, and then we go to our server, then we need our test and setup. It's the setup test.js, something like this. Let me check first before we continue. I think it should be something like setup files after env. We need our root directory. We go into our server, which then go into our test, then run our setup files, something like that. Let me check the documentation on that. Yeah. But yeah, setup files after env. Let's just copy this. Copy. And in here, let's just paste that. Alright, so what this configuration basically means is that we want Jest to run this file, which is the setup files .js first before we run any other test. So let's clear the console and say npm run test again, and then let's see what happens. Okay, our first test. Let's see. So this is coming from our setup file, which is this. All right. So why is this important? This is important because we would want to do things like connect to our database first, and then clear our database after each test, or set up certain variables or environment first before we run any test on that. So first of all, let us also create the connect to our database first. So before we run any test, what we want to do is to connect to our database. So we can say config, create a new folder with config file folder, and say db.js. So we bring in mongoose, and then we say connect. db will be an async function. First, I'd want to pass a URL here for things like dependency injection. We can research on that. Let's do a try catch, and then first we do console.log error.message, and then we will say process.exit with a false flag, which is 1, and then we can then connect to our database by saying our connect will be await mongoose.connect with our URL yeah, and then you actually want to console.log connect.host. We have connect dot, we have a connection, and then we have the host, which will determine which host we are connected to. It's either local host or an external the MongoDB server. So we then will have to say module.export equals to connect db, like that. All right. So inside our let's check to see if we have any errors. All right. So inside our setup file, which is the file that will run first before we run any other test, we want to bring in the connect db to connect our database. There should be in our config, and then set our db, and then before we run any other test, we can say that we can await connect db with URL will be mongodb localhost, and then we want to write yt, the name of the database, let's say tdd dev, something like that. Save, see what happens. We have one, so we are then connected to it. Indicate from the db.js that with this we are checking which database it's connected to, which is our local host, which is coming here, and then we pass that URL from here. So the reason why I'd want to pass it here is that during the development, we might want to connect to a different database, and then when we are running our tests, we would want to connect to a different database so that we do not have to delete and create. We do not have any conflicting data, something like that. So that's why I passed in the DB here, the URL for the test. I mean, yeah, you get what I'm trying to say. All right, so when you check the terminal, we see that we have this yellow thing going on here where it says that a process has failed to exist peacefully, has been forced, running, find leaks, all of these things. So what it means is that we still have our database connected and then not properly set up. So what we can then do is that after all, run an async function. Say await mongoose dot connection dot close, but we do not have mongoose in here, so we bring in mongoose like that. Yeah, so that should take care of that error. Everything clear. All right, so then what can we do then? We can then create a default data that would want to use to do our various tests. So inside the test file, I want to create a folder and say something like users.js, and then let's say users equals to an array of users. Let's say name, let's say my name, and email will be at gmail.com, and then let's say something like a password. Let's see password And shout out to the Boston Celtics for winning the NBA. Anyway, and then the name, another name will be LeBron James. Email, let's do lebron@gmail.com, and then another one, the password to be password, and then another one, let's see, name Kyrie Evan, and then email. These are my favorite NBA players though. Kyrie@gmail.com, and then password, do password. So basically these are the various sample data that we would want to use to do our various testing and bring in these different users to test for different scenarios. So let's export this as module default, not export equals to users, something like that. All right. So back in our setup file, we can then bring in our users. Inside our data, users. So if we should check to see, let's console.log users here. We then have our list of users to be where they we have an error here which was on Kyrie. Where is it? Where is it? Yeah. Save. Alright, so if we check out our list of users, we have these users here. Alright, so what do I want to do then next? So let us create our module for the user. So we say model, and say we create a new file and say user model.js. So we bring in mongoose seconds user schema equals to new mongoose.schema. We want the name to be a type of string, required to be true. So, and then also we need an email field, type should be string, required to be true, and then password type should be string, required to be true. We can also do our timestamps here and say timestamps should be true, which will do our created at and then updated at fields. All right, so what then we would do is that we can say module dot exports equals to mongoose.model, which will be our user, and then we pass our user schema like that. So basically what we need is the name field, email, and then the password. All right, password 1s. All right, so that's basically it for something like for a simple authentication that we are trying to create. Okay, so what then we can do is that back inside our setup file, let's bring in the user schema, and then which will be inside our model, and then inside our user schema. All right, require Is it models or model? Yeah. User model. Oh, should be here. Sorry. Save it. Alright, so what then we want to do is that before we run any test, we want to delete we want to clear our database like that. Yeah. Let's check our terminal to see if we have any errors. Yeah, we don't have any errors. We still have just our one test passing like that. And then we also would want to say that before each test, await user delete any like that. So basically, before we run all the tests, clear the database, and as well before we run each test, clear the database. This would prevent things like data duplication, and some petty errors that we would want to do. And as well, I would also want to, after all, I want to also clear the database as well. So basically what we are saying is that before we run any test, we want to clear the user database. Then before each test, let's clear the database. And after we are done with the test, close the MongoDB connection. That should come. We would want to clear the database first, and then we close the database connection, something like that. All right. So this is basically how we are setting up our test environment. So what then do we need to do? Let's create a utility function inside our server where the main purpose of the utility function is to just do basic CRUD stuff like create, delete, update, and that. So inside here, let's write a utility. Can't spell utility. Then in here, let's create some file like helper.js. Rename this. All right. So what the purpose of this function will be is to create user, which should be an async, and then we need our user data like that. So we just want to write the minimum code for this to pass. So let's say console.log create user. So module.export equals to create user like that. But before we do that, let's also bring in the user model inside the model, user model like that. All right, so inside our test, we can then create a new file and say utility.test.js and create a describe describe can't pass. It should test all utility functions and oh my days. Okay, so what this it should test creating, let's say it should create user properly, and should be an async function because we are going to use something like a promise. So let's bring in the create user, which will be in the, I think should go up another file, should be in the utility folder, and then helper, like that. Let's see what we have. All right, so we have two test suites running, which is the utility test, and then we have auth test 2 running as well. So we have two test suites running, the utility and then the auth test running. But for now, let us just delete the auth test because we sort of like don't need it for now. We write the test for that later. All right, so in here, what we want to do is that we want to create a user in our database, and we say const user equals to await create user, and then we want to just write the name of test, email test at gmail.com, and then we want to password like that. That should just pass even though we've not done anything yet, and this indicates that we are actually sort of like using the create user function here, since we do not have any error coming in here. So if we check the console, we have the create user coming from here. All right, so what then we can do is that we can let's console log the user data like that. Yeah, and then that should be the name, email, and then the password. Okay, so let's go ahead and then create the user. First of all, we'll need the bcrypt to hash our password, and then we'll say that we need a email, this destructure. From that, it will be user data like that. So at this point, we are still running our test, and since we are seeing this green flag, we are sure that we are not making in any others. We are confident that we are not creating any errors, either being typo or any other error that we are making. So for us to create the want to hash our password first before we create the user. So we can say first we generate our salt and say await bcrypt.gen salt. We need 10 rounds of that. Const hashed password equals to await bcrypt.hash we need our password, and then the salt, and then let's say console.log hashed password will be that, should be that. So yeah, so this is our new password. All right, so we can then create the user by saying const new, let's new user will be await user.create, want the name, email, and then the password should be hashed, should be a hashed password. All right, so when we console.log our new user, that should give us the user we would create in our database. So that should give us something like that. So this is the user that we've created with the name, email, and then this is the password. So what we'd want to do is first of all, let's put this in a try catch block like that. Right. Let's put this in a try catch block. Cut. And then let's console.log error.message, and then in here return an error object, the message of error.message like that. Then let's paste in the created user code, and then if it is properly created, return a new user like that. All right, let's see if we run into so basically that's the whole step in doing a test driven TDD development. So inside the test utility.test file, we can just test to see what we have here. Let's say console.log user, where should be what the create user function has created. So it's taking long. All right, so first of all, the code just passed, and then we have our user being created here. So even though this is passing, we are not properly testing the results that we are getting from the create user function. So what we then do is that we then will have to create our session and say something like expect user that to be equal to, we need an underscore ID, and say expect to be equal to, let me say expect that object containing underscore ID, expect that any to be object. The ID usually will be the mongoose types of object. Let's save and see what we can get if our code is passing. And it's saying failed. Object contains want expect wait. Let's console.log user like that. and then let's do type of user dot underscore id. What do we have? Yeah, it's an object. So why is it that it's not working? So we expect user dot to equal expect object dot object containing underscore id, and then we expect dot any, and it should be an object like that. Yeah, so our code is passing here, and then we'd also have a name to be expect that any should be a string. Basically what we are testing is that we want to test our various fields to make sure that if we check the let's console.log user, if we check the user that is created, we have the we have the name, email, and then the password. So all right, so instead of writing all of this, let's put this in a variable and say once user data will be that, and then let's pass it here and say user data like that. See if our code will pass. So it then becomes easy to refactor things when you write tests and that. So all right, so all our code is passing. So what we can also do is that we'd also want to make sure that the expectation that we are writing is a little bit solid. What do I mean by that? Let's say we also expect that user dot name to be user data dot name. So it should be the same name that we passed to the function. We should pass. And also we'd also expect that the password should be hashed. So we can say user.password that not to be user data dot password, something like that. So it shouldn't be the same password that we sent to the that we created, because we have hashed the password. So the create user function is working properly and everything is perfect. Okay, so this being this being done, where we have our create user, what we can then do is that let's go back into our setup.test and then say that before we run the test, first of all, let's bring in the create user function. Which will be in the model and say user model like that, and then And then also we've already brought in the users. Okay, so before or after deleting all the users, we will say await users dot await promise dot all users dot map. We want to just create a list of users in our database to use for our various functions. What do I mean by that? Let me explain. So let's pass in our async user and then await create user, and we pass in our user like that. Cool. Come check our terminal to see if we have an error coming in here. Promise that await promise that all. Create user is not a function. Create user. Oh, it should be in the utility function, the utility helper, like that. Yeah. Why did I do this? I'll explain. And first of all, let's go back into the config. I just want to take care of this first. Let's take out this. Yeah. Our test should pass. And then inside our utility function, since we are creating the create users, let's comment on this. Could I say create a user, and then let's in this one, let's say get list of users. So say const get users equals to an async function. You don't need to pass any argument. Return let's say user user.find. Let's do a try catch like that, and then let's say return error dot message, and then in here we can say const users equals to await users, user.find, you passing an empty query, then let's return the users like that. So in here we can just write the get users like that. Then back in our utility.test function, let's test the get users function, users like that. So inside the describe block, we then will write a new test. Say it should get list of users like that, and async, and say const users equals to await get users log users. So it's an empty function like that. So oh wait, like that. So we have this coming in from here, users coming in, let's say from here. Wait. Alright, so even though it's empty, what we probably should have done was that inside our setup file, where is it? Setup test.files, what we can do is that instead of we having to create it in the before all, let us create it in before each here, and then paste that here. So before each test, we'd want to first delete the list of users and then create new one. So that should give us cool. That should give us this list of users here, even though we have not created any user yet, but that has been created because we ran our setup file first, which then creates the list of users that we would need for our test here. So we can then inside our utility assert that expect users dot length dot to be greater than 0, something like that. Cool. So first we've created the function that creates user and then delete user. Right, so these are just two main functions that we will need to do, and then inside the we also would want to then create and test the endpoint as well. So it's more of like an integration test kind of. So inside the test file, test folder, let us where did we put a utility? Oh, let's bring this one outside our test. Okay, cool. We are having things failing here, because we are not requiring the file properly. So this should come from yeah. See what happens. Cool. All right, everything is passing now. All right, so let's test our endpoint. Write a test to, a different test to test our endpoint. So let's say let's test.js. And then first of all, what we'd want to bring in is our app. Require the app, and then also our .env require .env then config, and then let's bring in our Supertest. So we say const request require Supertest, like that. Basically that's what we need for now. Scribe block is with testing, authentication, and passing callback function. It should test registration. It should, let's just write it should just pass. Since we are going to use a promise, let us just use an async function right away. Cool. See if we have any errors. Okay, so we have our code passing. Our utility.test is passing. The auth.test is also passing. Okay, cool. So let's go back into our server and then create our various route and use it. So inside here we can do route. Then we say auth route.js. So first we want to bring in the router from Express, and then let's initialize our router. Yeah, and then let's export. All right, so if we should hit the get point of register, then let's create our controllers as well. We are using an MVC pattern, so let's create the controllers. So let's do auth controller.js. Then we can say get users controller. We want an async request response, and then pass in the next. Return. Let's just Jest.json with the message get users, and then module dot export equals to get users controller, like that. Oh, we made a mistake. No. We'll get back to this function later, even though everything is passing. Let's check to see if everything is passing. Okay, cool. So inside the auth route, let's bring in the get users controller, because to require the controllers, auth controller, and then let's pass that in here, like that. Cool. All right, so inside our app we have a mistake in somewhere. Oh, yeah. So inside our app, which will be here, let's define our route. First of all, we don't need this. Let's say route say app.use. First of all, I want API auth we want to use our auth routes, and then let's bring in the auth routes. Say auth routes equals to require will be in the routes auth routes, like that. Save. Cool. All right, so what we essentially did is that we created our auth routes and say that if we should make a GET request to the auth, first let's say route will be API auth register, like that. We'd want to use our get the users controllers here, like that. Yeah. So how then do we test for this? So first of all, what we then can do is that we've brought in the request from the Supertest. We brought in Supertest. This is what we are going to use to test our endpoint. And then we'll say that const body and then status code will be in which will be in an await function. We pass in the request function, and then we pass in the app and we say get API auth register, like that. That should create a get request for us. Cool. So everything is passing, but let's console.log the status code. We are expecting a status code of 200, something like that. Which means that the endpoint we've successfully hit the endpoint of register. So which is this. Even though we did not set the status code inside the get controller, we can then manually set the status code of 200, like that, and that should work as well. So we can then make an assertion in the auth test and say that expect status code dot to be 200, like that. We should pass. But if we should check the body, that should give us that should give us the message get users. All right, so that's coming in from here. But since we've already created and tested the get users function from the utility folder, which is this function, we can then bring in the get users function from the utility folder equals to utility helper. All right, so we can then say that users will be await get users, like that, and then we can then pass in the value for the users, like that. So in this situation, we know that the get users function is working properly because we've already tested that out in the utility.test file, which then pretty much give us the confidence that our get users file will work. But that doesn't work. Okay, what is the problem? Status 200.json. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that gives us this, which is coming in from where is it? Is this the auth? Yeah, which is coming in from here. So in our sessions, we can then say that expect users dot length dot to be greater than 0. That's users. Oh, I mean body. Sorry. Body dot length to be greater than 0. So we expect that we should be getting more than one item from the body while we having the to be greater than 0. Let's save it again, see what happens. Alright, it passes. Cool. Cool. We can also create another session that will expect body body dot to equal expect that's array containing and expect like that. Then we say expect that object containing underscore ID. Then we expect that's any string like that. So we expect the body to equal, we expect, we didn't write the expect, well, expectations wrong correctly. We expect an array containing, which should be an array, then we expect it to be containing an object containing an underscore ID like that, which should be a string. See if it passes. Yay. So basically with this expectation that we are writing, we expect the body to equal an array containing an object like that, and then we want the hover name expect to be that any string like that. Cool. All right. So we're done with the, and then also we'd also want to test for it it should create user properly, like that. It should be an async function. And then what we are trying to do is that we want to body and then status code to be an await request passed to app, and then we want to make a post request to forward our API auth, and then register, and then we want to send let's bring in passing a user data, and before that we say user data will be equals to name John Doe, email john@gmail.com, and then the password will be password, like that. So in here, even though it might pass, it's still the false pass. Okay, it failed actually. So this is where we start seeing the power of TDD, where even though we've written our test, it's still failing because we expect okay, so from here we can just say that console.log status code, which should be 401, because we have not created the endpoint yet. So it's 404 because we've not created that endpoint yet. So let's go back into our auth route, and in here we can then say router post / register, like that. We want to create a user controller. We've not created this function yet, but we want to create that in our auth controller, like that. And then inside the auth controller, we can then say create user controller will pass a request response, and then the next, and then first of all let's return rest.json with a message create user, like that. Let's save, and then let's export this function from here, like that. Create user, like that, and then back inside the auth route, create user, like that. Cool. Alright, so we see that it changes from 404 to 200. So at this point we know that we are hitting our endpoint. So inside the auth.test.js, if we should check out what we have inside the body, we should have the message that we would want to create user, like that. So inside the auth controller, we can then bring in the create user function that we created earlier on, like that. And then we then do our try catch. All right, so we do a try catch. And if there's an error, want to return an error, and then the message will be the error.message. We can actually create a different way of handling the errors by having to create things like error handlers and that. So in here we can then say const. We need the name, email, password. So from the request.body, const save await user.create. Now we can await bring the create user, and then we pass in the name, email, password, like that. And then return res.json 201 JSON, and then the user, like that. So we save. All right. So it's 201, which is coming in from here. All right. So inside the auth test, we can, if we check out the body, we should have wait status code body so it's log body. What do we get? One. Why are we getting the post API? Let's send. Wait, something I'm not doing right. Oh, status, like that. All right, so we have that. So inside the auth.test, we can say that we can create our session and say expect body.name, some simple assertion to be user data.name, something like that. I mean, it should be the same person that we are trying to create. Test passes, like that. And also we can also do an assertion, say expect body dot password but not to be user data dot password. That we are testing that it should be, the password should be encrypted. Okay, cool. So if you've followed along this path, it's then basically it's you then basically would follow this pattern to just write and test your code whilst you are writing your creating the application. So basically it's just a simple setup, but let's go on ahead and then check for things like when there's an error. So let's come in here and say that it should not create user with invalid details. So async and then const user data will be name. Let's make it empty. Mail should be empty and password should be empty. So we pass it the body status code, and then we'll wait our request passing the app should be a post first API auth register, and then we send off our user data like that. Everything passes, but then we have to create our assertion. In here we have validation field, which is coming in from the here, but let's clear off that. But we expect that inside the body we would have a let's check what we have inside the body. Let's do the console slug body like that. So what I'd want, the takeaway in all of this is that you realize that we are not writing, as we are not manually testing our code with having to either use something like a Postman or our browser to traditionally test our code. So we can just say that we expect body.error to be truthy. We expect that there should be an error field like that. Good, something like that. So I'll end the first part of the tutorial here since it's getting a bit long, and then I'll continue away. Why do we have this error? Cool. All right, let's save it again to be sure. Cool. So I'll end the first part of the tutorial here, and then in the next time we'll go ahead and do things like having to create the login, log out, and then dive in more deeply into the test-driven development. So at this point, I would also use the opportunity to say thank you to all my 500 subscribers that we have achieved recently. It's a really big deal for me. I really appreciate that you've subscribed, and I'll do my best to bring you more amazing and awesome content. So thank you for us reaching 500, and let's keep going. So don't forget to like, if this is your first time, don't forget to also subscribe, but as well don't forget to like, subscribe to my channel, and see you in the next part of the tutorial. Thank you.